Jim Duke Radio Network.
Welcome to Jim Duke Perspective. My website is jimdukeperspective.com. And you can listen on any app, any podcast player app, and we're on them all. Last time we were talking about the bloodlines of the elite, the international, we were talking about the banking elite, their bloodlines. And I continued my research because I'm doing a study on it for a book that I'm trying to get together. So I took where Gary Wayne left off. You know, he was talking about the different orders from the Knights Templar. He was talking about the banking system, how they brought their funds into Switzerland. And I guess we find that even the Rothschilds and the King of Spain brought their funds, transferred it to Switzerland. So I want to start talking about the international elite banking cabal in the House of Rothschild. You ever hear the story how the Rothschilds got together, how they formed the banking cartel?
I remember there's what was it, like the Battle of Waterloo in I believe it was England, and they had the bets that everybody was betting on what they knew they had inside information, this family. So they did the opposite, this family, of what was the Battle of Waterloo was going to be taking place. So when they seen that everybody's seen that they're going to be selling their shares, they sold it and they quickly bought them back at a very dirt cheap price. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, but even before that, they were sort of recognized. They had a bloodline recognition. And even though they were said to be, the Rothschild family was settled in the Jewish ghettos back in Frankfurt in Germany.
What year was this around?
This was, the family was actually in 1585.
Mm-hmm. Going back a couple of weeks.
Yeah, And before that, they existed, but I start where I traced it back to an Isaac Elkanan, who was also known as Isaac Bauer, and it was the Bauer family in which every Jewish quarter in Frankfurt, they weren't distinguished by house numbers; they were distinguished by notable banners, like signs that they had over their houses. And the Bowers families, the Elkanans, however you say that, families, had a particular color, and they used the red shield as their color.
Red shield? Was it just a plain red shield?
It was a red shield, and then later on they changed it. They had the hexagram symbol on it, but they used the red shield as their crest, in which that's what they adopted as their name, their family name, the Red Shield family.
Wow. And there's a lot of red shield symbology. Probably that can relate.
I'm sure. Yeah. It's occultism. They were involved in occultism and stuff. And the Red Shield is how in German is how they got the Rothschild name. It's Red Shield is German for Rothschild is German for Red Shield. And they haven't really been poor. They've just been presiding in the Jewish ghettos, and descendants of the descendants of the Isaac Bauer family was Amschel Moses Rothschild, or Bauer, and he was a German Jewish money changer and merchant, and he had his ties into loaning to dignitaries, learning the trade of money exchange, which had to do with a currency system back then. And he taught his children that trade. His son, Mayer Amschel Rothschild. And Mayer Amschel Rothschild is where the modern banking system started propelling to what you said, what you claimed. And Amschel, Mayer Amschel had a motto. He said, "I care not the laws of a nation. I'll control its wealth and I'll make the laws." So the Rothschilds aspired to be a financial powerhouse.
That reminds me real quick, that the one who owns the rules, what is it, the golden rule, those who own the gold make the rules? Anyway,
that was said by Okay, well, similar to that, there was a saying from President Garfield: "Whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce." So they take it to that aspect, yes. And the Rothschilds absolutely took it to the next extent, being devious misers of money and such. They enhanced the family business, and for 2 generations, the male descendants of the Rothschilds intermarried their first cousins and even nieces to expand their dynasty. And Mayer Amschel had 5 children that he sent to 5 different main European financial centers, one to Vienna, one to London, one to Naples, Paris, as well as staying in Frankfurt to conduct business and establish their banking branches. So they sort of set out to start their banking in internationally across Europe. And they served merchants, kings, barons, dukes, politicians, and governors and governments as their clients. And this was found. This was actually in the works of Carol Quigley that I found this information. So they had been. Now here's what I was saying about their connections. They had privilege of finances because of them cooperating with secret societies. If you cooperate with secret societies and you prove promise, you develop within the secret societies, and it enables you to expand. And they expanded their banking operations into European countries, benefiting from the international business and political contacts of the Freemasons, what the Freemasons were setting up. And they allied with the Illuminati as well. So they had inside of intellects and other wealthy people. They've had their presence established throughout the continent at this time, and they further financed the Freemasons to build their New World Order.
Jeez. Now, before you mentioned the Red Cross, would that be relating to the Cross of Maltese?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all.
Because I know they have don't they have a cross on there?
Yeah, it's all the same type of things. The St. John Hospitalers, and the Templars.
Oh yeah, okay.
They use the cross, and you have Switzerland, the white cross on the red background. That all and you saw Columbus with the with the 3 ships there.
Yep.
Every one of them had Templar flags.
Wow.
No, people didn't recognize that. Okay. They were sent out.
That's what we learned in high school, right?
Yeah. And then you have the Order of the Red Cross, and you have the Red Cross that deal with
the American Red Cross.
Yeah, yep. That's all to do with Templars.
Now, one thing though, in Africa,
Hospitallers, that's what they get there.
Hospitallers.
Yeah.
One thing about the American Red Cross, you can look this up, is when they visited tribes in Africa, the tribes equated the American Red Cross as death to their tribes, their members. Soon after they'd leave, then they end up throwing rocks at the Red Cross buses and trucks. You can look that up; it's a fact. But I just had to throw that in, though. So they do some good, but they might not be as good as we thought they were. So
it's like the Shriners with their hospitals and their donations.
Yep.
That's their outward appearance of hospitality, of beneficiaries to others. That's their humanitarian work. But when you look behind the scenes of the Shriners, which are 32nd degree Masons, they're mixed up in the Morocco shrines of the Muslims that slaughtered Christians.
Wow.
And that's why they wear the wet red fez. It's a symbol of slaughter of the Christians. And they grow at that point to be Luciferian. So they think of themselves as the highest absolute righteous level of morality.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of behind the scenes. And then you have the St. Jude foundations that give.
Oh, St. Jude. Oh,
yeah, and St. Jude. You know how that was about?
Yeah.
The Jesuits. It was through Danny Thomas, the actor.
Okay, right.
He made a Faustian bargain to St. Jude, to an angel, to a demon.
Whoa.
And he said, I want fame and fortune, and I'll do anything in return. I'll give back my wealth. I'll do anything if you make me famous. And he got famous, so he dedicated a shrine to St. Jude, and that's how the St. Jude Society got founded.
Wow. I think I've given to them before, too.
Yeah, they do benevolent work, but they're based on praise to a demon.
Right, yeah.
Well, they'll say to an angel because it's St. Jude, or to a fallen saint, or to a saint or whatever. But we know that saints, when they appear before you, they're not the saints of people. They're the images of demons. They're demonic spirits. So these people have unwittingly given to demonic spirits.
So many people in Hollywood the same way, given themselves are over to just for success, over to the dark side.
Well, the Bible says, even Satan himself masquerades as a
angel of light,
as an angel of light, and his ministers righteousness. So just because they're doing benevolent work of righteousness doesn't mean that they have an honest intent, because it says their end is destruction. Their end is death. Right. And they want to bring down people to believe in them. They want them to be worshipped, and then you lose your soul because you're worshiping St. Jude rather than Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You're worshiping demons rather than God.
Exactly. And the reason why they're doing that good is to deceive. So that good is not good ultimately. Mm-hmm. So, yep.
So I'm sure that the Rothschilds and others have this Luciferian worship. And even though it might be allegory, because people that worship Lucifer don't necessarily worship a guy named Lucifer, the entity. They worship the idea of Lucifer, of being light, of being enlightened. But it is said that the Rothschilds actually set a figurative place at their meetings for an entity of Lucifer had he wanted to join them. Mm-hmm. So they're steeped in occultism and such. But the Rothschilds, getting back to them, there was two powers, world powers at the time, which is France and Britain. And since France was in opposition to the Rothschilds' centralization of Europe in their capital and aspirations for world government, they needed to destabilize France into chaos. And this I got from Nesta Webster in the book French Revolution, and it talks about how it's necessary to start the ball rolling for the Illuminati. And the plot was found out, though. This I got from the Bavarian Illuminati from La Forester, translated into English. And the plot, I don't want to get into the whole Illuminati plot, but the Illuminati were setting out to send the instructions for a French Revolution to other Illuminates, like Robespierre and those guys of the Enlightenment. And the priest that was the courier, his name was Jacob Lang or Jacob Lanz. It's hard to tell the spelling. I've seen it both ways in ancient writings, or early writings. But this courier was like a Jesuit priest, and he was carrying the book with him of the instructions of the Illuminati, the protocols for the Illuminati, and it was sewn in his robe, with the members sewn in his cuff so that he can tell who the members were when he met them. And on his way, he was struck by lightning. A miracle, He was struck by lightning, and he lay dead. Weishaupt hit the road. He vacated the place, and the Bavarian police came and found in his robe the plan for the French Revolution. And they told the Bavarian police told the French government, and they didn't believe them. Like, there's no plot. We don't have to worry about this. But Weishaupt continued, and the Bavarian Illuminati closed down. I mean, the Bavarian police closed down the Illuminati in 1785, and raided their homes and such, and supposedly stopped their operations, but they kept going. So through the Rothschilds kept financing this plan through the Illuminated Freemasons, and the revolution still broke out. And the Rothschilds supported the finances for the war through one of their Illuminati agents, Napoleon. And this is what you were talking about. Napoleon rose to power and was supported of the French Revolution, and they rose him up to power in France to control France. Now, the Battle of Waterloo, as you said, with England at war with France, the Waterloo was the determined outcome of who would control Europe. And since the Rothschilds financed war, they had an interest in both. They financed both sides of the war from that war and ever since. So they had foreknowledge of the outcome since they had agents reporting back to them, and they heard that Napoleon had been defeated. But having their knowledge of the outcome, they used it as an opportunity. And Nathan Rothschild looked. He played it as if Napoleon won the defeat, and acted glum and deceived the market by selling off his stocks. And his agents also sold off their stocks, giving the impression that Napoleon won. And this caused a panic in the stock market of the sell-off, and it plummeted the market. Now, of course, we know that Napoleon lost, and the Rothschilds were able to buy up the consuls for pennies on a dollar. So they were able to get rich overnight. And
thank you for that concise explanation.
Yeah, they became wealthier. And they had complete control over the British economy as well as all of Europe at that point. So they set up a central bank of England. Now, it didn't matter to the Rothschilds whether it was set up in England or France. They would just settle in one of the outcomes because they did not care. They don't care about a nation or the laws in a nation. They care about the economy. Give me the wealth of a nation and I'll control it. So with their financial power, the Rothschilds could trigger war of any adversary of the agenda, and at the same time gain wealth by interest from the money they loaned out for wars. Isn't that a lovely balance they have? And they would
scheming.
They would rise up against any nation that owed them debt and threaten the forces of balance of power against them if they didn't pay up. And they funded both sides of the war, and they profited, and they sent one government after the other. So they would go to one government and say, hey, they're provoking you. And they go to another government and said, hey, they're provoking you. But we got the money to fund you, but you'll owe us. Because you can't get them to borrow loans if there's no conflict, right?
Exactly.
So conflicts,
and we see that all continuing today, too.
Exactly. So conflicts are meant deliberately to do things that you would not normally do. So they can loan out, they can confiscate, they can have you surrender rights, they can have politicians bow to them.
That could be classified as the Hegelian dialect, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's all part of the same thing, yeah.
Yep.
So then they had a battle for the central bank in America. And the dynastic monarchies of Europe started disintegrating. And the Rothschilds got together the wealthy banks, families of the power centers to form the alliances for the international banks. And they brought together Baring, Lazard, Erlanger, Warburgs, Schroeder, Seligman, Spires, Mirabaud, Mallet, Faude, and Morgans. And these 12 families with the Rothschilds worked together to collaborate the international banking system. Now, I've always heard there was 12 families that they got together, but I didn't know until I saw in Tragedy and Hope what these families were. He names them. Now, they were invested in industry and emerged in financial capitalism. They wanted socialism for the ideologies for the people, but they were capitalists. Of course they were. They had investment power influencing government and politics and devoted their secrecy to secret use of financial leverage in political life to dictate policies in the governments.
It's the Bowers, the Bauer family. They're not part of the 12, right? Bauer?
Yeah, they're the Rothschilds.
Okay, all right. Mm-hmm.
Yep, Bowers are the Rothschilds.
Okay.
They changed their name.
Red Shield, Rothschild.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And these became known as merchant bankers, international bankers, private bankers, investment bankers. And they had their first central bank in the United States in 1791. Now, it had to be renewed every 20 years. And they wanted a privately owned bank. But the battle for the central banks continued because U.S. was giving them trouble, United States. Alexander Hamilton was fighting for a United States central bank, American Central Bank. He was the United States Secretary of Treasury. Now, he was still a Freemason, but he was seen as a rivalry of the Rothschilds who wanted the central bank in England, so they had a little bit of a conflict. Hamilton wanted it in America. So the Rothschilds planted one of their agents, Aaron Burr, in positions of American government. They financed him to run for president, and he lost. He came close to Jefferson. But instead, Aaron Burr became vice president under Jefferson. And Jefferson was no better. He was sympathetic of the Illuminati. But Burr's interest was not in the United States. He wanted to establish the central bank in the United States for the international bankers and set them up with England. So he had a conflict with Hamilton, who wanted an American central bank. So they had a duel. And you heard about the famous duel between Burr and Hamilton. Burr killed Hamilton and then fled to Britain to escape conviction. Now, this is in the history books, but it's not detailed. It just says Aaron and Hamilton had a argument, or Hamilton was killed, but they didn't tell over what. It was over the central banks. And of course, your history books are going to omit that because they don't want the conspiracy part of it. So, but it's interesting that Aaron Burr left back to go to his handlers in Britain until they dropped all the charges, and then he returned to New York and he used the surname Edward and remained there as an attorney. So the Rothschilds continued their wrath, and I guess it was set up that America, the United States, was declaring war on England. And the intentions of the Rothschild was, of course, to cause America to go to war so they would seek force of financial aid. Mm-hmm. Because that's what they did, force them into financial aid, which they wouldn't. Great Britain, however, failed to regain the colonies, and the United States failed to occupy Canada. So while the central bank was not fully implemented in the United States, the bankers still had their American agents exercising control in the American monetary system through the politics. And the Rothschilds still had a powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. So they still had power. Now, another president came on the scene, Andrew Jackson. Mm-hmm. And Andrew Jackson fought against the central bank, knowing what it would mean. And since the central banking came up on expiration again in 1836, the Rothschild issued an ultimatum to either renew it or face war. And Jackson recognized them as Masonic bankers, calling them thieves, and he threatened them. And the Rothschilds gave their orders, teach these insolent Americans a lesson, according to historian Richard Boson.
Wow.
And the British government began to limit American sea trade and check the American expansion in Canada. Now, how's that sound familiar? When we have something against the nation, we stop their trade. That's what we did with Russia, and that's what we did with other. They're still practicing this.
Yep. See how we don't learn these details in school or in the news?
Yeah, you don't learn this deep detail. That's why this is the counter history record.
Mm-hmm. That shows they control the news as well, and the scientific, the educational curriculum, things like that. So,
and they don't teach you this either. The United States had Rothschild agents in Abraham Lincoln's cabinet, like Judah Benjamin. He's a chief advisor of Jefferson Davis, and they planted him to sell Lincoln of the financial dealings with the Rothschilds. But Lincoln was also suspicious of the international bankers. So what did the Rothschilds do?
You know what happened to him? It was John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah, but what did they do? What happened? Oh. What did the Rothschilds plan
for Lincoln?
They planned wars.
Okay, right.
So the United States had survived this revolutionary wars with Great Britain, and they won, and they caused a hiccup in the plans of the New World Order for the Rothschilds. So the bankers, even though they relied on war to drive government deep into debt and cause them pressure, they needed an enemy against the United States, and they didn't have any. So they caused friction from within the states. The Civil War.
Civil War. Okay, I was going to say that.
Yep.
So wouldn't it be the South that was for, like, basically freedom, like we the people, and the North for the, was basically the cabal, if you want to say, for the North?
They say it was over slaves and such, but, we know that revolutions are a method used by the bankers because that's what the Illuminati were, wars and revolutions. So they divided the nation from within, causing opposition between the two. And the motive was to force the United States by creating a financial need for them to borrow from the bankers. And it broke out in 1861. The North was financed by Rothschilds through the American agent August Belmont. And the South through Elanger brothers, one of the legs of the financial interest with the Rothschilds, and they were related to the Rothschild families. So the Rothschilds on both sides started the war.
Wow.
They just used an excuse. But instead of turning to the international banks for funds for war, Lincoln utilized the right of Congress to coin its own money. So they he brought in interest-free greenbacks printed to finance the war. We're going to stop here for a break, Darren. We'll be back in a second, and we will return and continue this talk after this ad. Please tolerate it, folks. We'll be back in a second. All right, so we were talking about Lincoln. Lincoln promised that if he got reelected in 1864, he would begin to fight against the bankers as soon as the war was over. So the war ended, and a few days later, so did Lincoln's life.
Yep.
He was assassinated, as you said, by John Wilkes Booth.
Supposedly.
Yeah. But he was an Illuminati, he was a Freemason agent. So it's likely he was set up to do it, or at least blamed for it.
Mm-hmm. So
the Rothschilds had to go further to entangle the United States. They financed a bunch of industrialists in America. There were the Rockefeller families that were gaining power in Standard Oil dynasties. So they incorporated them. The Warburgs, who they already had partnership with in Germany, and they were partnered with Kuhn, Loeb, and Company in New York. And they had U.S. European agents that kept them in contact with the others, as well as the Carnegie Steel. So this cabal fraternity became powerful, operating through corporations and controlling governments as private bankers. So they used the corporations through the bank controls to control the industry. And of course, we know that they use that to control the politicians through the government as well. So the bankers control, through their monetary leverage, all aspects. And this gave them power to develop the central bank. Now, how did they develop a central bank in America, Darren?
Central bank in America. I know this one.
Was there a central bank in America?
You mean initially or
at this point?
Well, at this point, I don't think there was.
So they had to come up with a way that the American people would accept the central bank without knowing it. There was a meeting in 1908 through Senator Aldrich that he had confidential invitations to Jekyll Island, Georgia.
Okay, right. I learned about this, yes,
in which he
on a video.
He brought the Morgans, the Vanderclips, Rockefellers, Morgans, Warburgs, and secretly they met to write recommendations for a National Monetary Commission report. And they drew up principles that they'd agree. Every member voted for the central bank, but they couldn't use the name central bank. Warburg stressed we cannot call it a central bank. We have to avoid it at all costs, or else citizens would become skeptical. Now, why do they care about citizens? Why don't they just trample over us?
Because we're the ones that's generating all that wealth through our work. Labor.
Yeah, and they have to keep. They don't want to cause a revolution, so they keep things in secret because they know that we could still have a say in hindering their plans. Mm-hmm. So instead, they created this facade that it was an American regional reserve under the U.S. government.
Let me guess. Called the Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve, and this became the Federal Reserve Act, which was nothing more than private banks, members, running the currency of the United States. And it passed in 1913. Many of the representatives of Congress took leave for the holiday, December 23rd, and they voted it into Congress while everybody was going home. Isn't that something? They do that today.
Crafty.
They did that with Obama did that a lot.
Mm-hmm. It's no more federal than Federal Express, too.
Yeah, Federal Reserve is not federal government.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the federal government's not federal government. It's all confiscated monetary. It's the bankers. So this gave the monetary currency power in the United States to the oligarchy of the financial interest of the member banks that promoted the Federal Reserve, with the idea that it would be controlled by Congress, but that's what the public thought. That's what they promoted it as. But the members were selected by private banks that owned the stock. Now, I have the names of these banks. The Rothschilds owned 51% of the shares, and the rest were divided between Warburgs, banks of Amsterdam and Hamburg, Lazard Brothers, Israel Moses, CF banks of Italy, Rockefellers, Chase Manhattan, Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, and Cohn Loeb Bank of New York. Now, we know that some of these had a little bit of trouble because they don't think nothing of stabbing one weak link and throwing them, to the wolves. Mm-hmm. But now this is an interesting say in the Financial Times in 1921 reported that half a dozen men at the top of the big banks could upset the whole fabric of government finance by refraining from renewing treasury bills. It was very unwell known. It was very secretive. They did not meet public address and talked about this in the press. It was only talked about on the inside. That's why they got away with it.
Mm-hmm. You got to get him some credit. I hate to say it, It was pretty slick.
Yep. So
Frustrating.
Yep. So the powerful banks had it over the government, financing and personal influence. They could steer governments and bribe politicians any way they wanted to force pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Get the lobbyists.
And since most of the dignitaries and the politicians, they lack financial expertise, they resorted to the banks as experts in the field. So the bankers had powerful leverage. And they used the leaders to use war and bribe. America is used as a bully of war.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, I mentioned my nephew with his book Global Bully about how the governments in the oligarchy uses the United States military as bullies to pressure others in war. Since we became the dominant nation, they said, hey, let's use them.
Exactly. Yep. You got the three pillars: the financial, the religious in Rome, and the in England it's the what's the other one again? The military.
Yeah, the financial, which is in Rome, in London, the
city of London.
The religion in Vatican, and the military of Washington D.C.
Washington D.C. Yes. Yep.
Yep.
Three evil pillars.
Yep.
Yep.
Now, there's another quote here. Powerful Bank of England and its governors was admitted by most qualified observers in January 1924. Reginald McKenna, who had been Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1915, as chairman of the board of Midland Bank, told its stockholders, "I am afraid the ordinary citizen will not likely be told that what the bankers can and do, that they can create money, and they who control the credit of the nation direct the policies of the governments and hold in hollow of their hands the destiny of the people." Again, this is, I care not the wealth of a nation. I mean, the rules of the nation, the laws of the nation. I'll control its wealth and I'll make the laws. Rothschild. Now, J.P. Morgan became a most powerful financier also, and it's noted in a letter sent from President Roosevelt to Colonel Edward House, who was an Illuminati agent under Woodrow Wilson, in which he said, "I had a nice talk with Jack Morgan. The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the larger centers has owned government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson." Folks, this is factual stuff.
Yep.
The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This was quoted by Carroll Quigley. Now, up to this point in 1960s, they were gaining ground. And then something happened. And we'll end with this today. There was a president, President Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was a shoo-in for the Illuminati because his father was in the mafia, associated with the mafia. And it was supposed to be his son Joe, who was in the military, that was approved to be president. Now notice, he was promised to be president. They can promise you a presidency because they rigged the system.
Yep.
But upon Joe's death in the service, he no longer qualified. He couldn't do it, obviously. So the Kennedys said, "Well, I'll have to give you my son John." So they rose up John F. Kennedy to be the agent as president. But something happened to John F. Kennedy as his eyes opened. I believe it was an act of God.
Right.
And he started seeing what they were doing. He told about conspiracies. He told about secret societies. He tried to reveal them in the. There's a press conference. I think it was 1961 or 2, April 27th, if I recall, before the American press, where he exposed the secret societies and said there's a secret plot and we're going to put an end to it. He signed Executive Order 11110 that returned to the government the power to issue currency without going through the Federal Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
His order gave the Treasury Department the power to issue silver certificates against any silver bullion, silver or standard in the Treasury. Every ounce of silver in the U.S. Treasury Department's vaults, the government could introduce new money into circulation. Basically, he revived the greenbacks, the American dollar, without having to go through Federal Reserve. And the ramifications were enormous because just with the stroke of a pen, Kennedy was on his way of putting the Federal Reserve Bank out of business.
We know what happened to him.
And we know what happened to him.
Yep.
They put him out of business. So as we know, the evidence is surmounted that this was a government act, not a random act of an outsider, but it was eliminating his interference with the plans of the international banks for the New World Order. So they set up an assassination. And no more silver certificates were issued after that. But do you know, Darren, that the executive order was never repealed and it's still valid?
Mm-hmm.
It's just not acted upon. So let's end there, and that's the basis for the International Cabal with the House of Rothschild. So my website is jimdukeperspective.com. Check it out and keep in touch with us. Give us a like and give us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. It helps our reviews. And check out my YouTube station, my new YouTube channel that I just do Jim Duke Rants. And basically, I just have teasers to point you back to the show since I can't use the buzzwords or I'll get flagged. So I use a little bit of sarcasm to point people back and to give you little hints of what's going on. But the main places are the podcast and articles that I write that are on my website. So I thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.